we chose to adopt Notion as a no-code platform in Silva. This is one of the things that Scratch Advisors, my company, does fairly regularly.
Mhm.
Is that, I'm just going to share a picture real quick because I think it does a good job of explaining this problem. It's very common for companies these days to have like a couple of anchor applications, like a HubSpot and maybe a Jira, and then in between is the messy middle of disorganized chaos. And so all the information that the employee arguably needs to find and consume is in Slack messages, emails, 10 different duplicate spreadsheets that only certain people know where they are and why you would go to that spreadsheet, right? And so at a holistic level, and kind of like a philosophical management level, this is the problem that this is the dragon we've been trying to slay for 2 years, and making great incremental progress, this onboarding solution being one example. But this problem is kind of the genesis of, hey, instead of us buying 15, 20, 30 different SaaS tools to like solve these individual problems and in individual departments, let's actually architect for ourselves a Silva custom operating architecture built on top of a no code platform, in this case, Notion, that only expresses what Silva needs to do its job. So that foundational piece exists in this company. We've done it for a lot of different departments and workflows, delivery, project management, customer success, product road mapping, and others. And obviously, HR onboarding is the one we're talking about today. Do you have anything you want to add to that before I hop over?
No, but the only thing I would add there is that by making your onboard experience in Notion, in this system where everything else is going to live, it sort of automatically making the employee comfortable with the environment they're going to work in, which I think was a really good connector for us. Because if we're just going to use Notion for onboarding over here and not for anything else, well, that doesn't make any sense, or even vice versa. And so by going through your onboarding in Notion, you've learned how to use the Notion platform. And you're ready to interact with the other teams and how they use it in the company.
Yeah, well said. Okay, so I'm just going to describe a little bit about how we set this up, and then we'll take a look at it, and we can talk about how it's going. So with Notion, this is some advice to any small, medium-sized businesses that are listening. SMB is kind of, in my opinion, like the target market for a company adopting Notion. You want to keep the solutions as simple as possible, and sometimes Notion gets a bad rap for being overly complex. I'll just remind us that like we make it complex, like we add complexity to it, and I'm guilty of it myself. Like it's so fast to build in that you can kind of get caught up in, oh, it would be cool if.
Yeah.
And so I have to kind of remind myself like, no, we need to keep this as simple as possible. So in the spirit of trying to build a global decentralized onboarding solution that solves all those problems that you and I talked about, we have one database that's driving this whole thing, and we call it the master onboarding database. And we rolled this solution out at Silva in 3 phases. Phase 1 was just getting all of the HR steps added into the system so that the basic legal and financial and tax and benefits requirements were met in the beginning. Phase 2 was layering on top of that the actual best practices and tools and cultural knowledge and market knowledge contained in different departments. Like, what do you need to know when you join the GIS department versus what do you need to know when you join the sales department? So making it accessible for department leaders to contribute onboarding cards. We call them cards. It's just like a database record in Notion, but it looks like a card to the new employee. What onboarding cards do we want, does the sales leader want to come into the experience versus, say, the delivery department leader? And then phase 3 which we just recently rolled out, and I'm not sure it's actually been globally announced yet, but we're ready. I think we're ready to do this. Is publishing a Notion form to all employees who are out there on the perimeter fighting the battle every day, becoming aware of mission critical, like small best practices that they think in their mind, like, oh my gosh, the next person that comes behind me to do this job has to know about this one thing that I just tripped over. And so, to me, that's almost the most important part. I mean, obviously, getting paid and getting benefits is foundationally important. But in terms of getting up to speed in your job quickly and with confidence and kind of comprehensive knowledge, you can't replace like what the support team is experiencing on calls with customers that they can then feed back into the onboarding experience. So I'm really excited about the idea that individual contributors across the company can now feed real-time intelligence back into this master onboarding database, which, as I'm going to show you here in a second, feeds out into a personalized onboarding plan for each new person that's customized by their country, their department, their team, etc. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
I don't.
Okay, so let's take a look at how this looks. Let's just start from like the new person's experience. So we have a template for if you onboard in Spain, and we have a template for if you onboard in the United States, just because there's different people you actually talk to. So when they first join, this page gets created, and then it gets shared to them. And this is their comprehensive project where they manage their own onboarding. So we've got some quick links here, like going to get trained on Notion, a People Hub where you can get HR information, linking out to Bamboo HR, which is actually interesting. And I want to talk about that briefly. You have Bamboo HR.
Yeah.
Bamboo HR is an HRIS system. I think it's a reasonable question to say, well, if I've got an HRIS system, why do I need a different onboarding solution? Because isn't Bamboo HR taking care of onboarding? And I'll venture my answer to that because I'm talking and I have momentum, but I really want you to answer it. I feel like sometimes onboarding gets narrowly defined by the first phase of what onboarding has to be, which is the payroll and the benefits.
Yeah.
And so you can't do onboarding without doing those things. And the other parts of onboarding are very hard to do and very scattered across the organization. And HR doesn't have the reach and influence to usually control that. And so Bamboo HR and other HRIS systems like it satisfy the first phase very well.
Yeah.
But it's the other aspects of onboarding, like how quickly can we get you up to speed in your job with the knowledge to do your job and the access to the tools you need and things like that we've built in Notion that Bamboo HR probably isn't going to be the knowledge hub for the entire company. You know, that's my take on why it was worth investing in a Notion onboarding solution. Does that sound right to you? What would you
I
change
think
about that answer?
that's absolutely right. Because I would, again, we can argue semantics all day long. There's sort of like, there's the period of time from when an employee signs their offer letter until the employee shows up on day one. And so there's a ton of stuff that has to happen behind the scenes at the company to get ready for that person to be here on day one. And those tasks can be tracked in a bunch of different systems. And then there's also what I call
and we chose to do that. Sorry to interrupt you, but we chose to do that in Bamboo HR.
Yeah.
Right? Bamboo
Because
HR. Go ahead.
It made sense because we were like, your offer letter had come from there. There were good sort of visualizations and tracking things that needed to happen. And it made sense to not reinvent the wheel over in Notion. Because putting it in Notion didn't add a ton of value for those types of activities. And we wanted to use it where it was going to add value. And then and then again, Bamboo, how we use it is just our HRIS system. So we use it for hiring, we use it for payroll. Um, we have integrations to do all of our global employees there as well. So it made sense to handle the stuff that as I started the conversation, I talked about the very administrative and tactical stuff that has to be done. I call it the table stakes of HR that you have to get right and do well so that we can go do the higher value things. So even if I didn't have Notion, in order to do like a robust onboarding, like we're going to talk about here, from say day one through your onboarding and assimilation in the company, I would have had to go invest in a learning management system or some other type of tool that again would be totally disconnected from the work I want those employees to do. So
Yeah.
by putting it in Notion, by teaching them how to use this like product function and task tracking, it sets them up to be able to work within their team because their teams are working in Notion and they understand the automations and what's going through it. So it
Yeah.
was about having as few systems as possible and about having as much connected information as possible.
Yeah. To me, that's the big difference between a no code platform like Notion versus like you mentioned, a learning management system. If you
Yeah.
had a learning management system, you would need to populate as an abstraction of your business knowledge, some documents and best practices into that learning management system, but it would be stale very quickly.
Yeah.
And then so that begs the question, well, why isn't that true in Notion? And the answer is because we are architecting Techno Silva's Notion to be woven into the very heartbeat of how people do their jobs. And so in the act of doing a particular job and updating the best practices for that job while you're doing it, the onboarding system that points at that thing in Notion is getting updated information. Whereas if you're using a learning management system, that is an abstraction and it's a point in time abstraction, and people aren't doing their job in it. And
Yeah.
so that's why I think, like, that's what motivates me to invest my energy and time to help companies build in Notion, is because we're removing the latency between the the doing of the job and the kind of intellectual property byproduct and the data artifacts of having done that job. And that's a critical thing. I think we've all rolled our eyes at the statement like, oh, we should write an SOP about that. Like when people start writing SOPs, like you can't not write an SOP. You want to write an SOP because it's got to be written down somewhere. But SOPs just go to die in a cloud drive, and no one ever looks at them again. And so it was valuable at that moment in time, when the person wrote it, and it certainly reinforced their understanding of how to do that particular job. But the likelihood of the next 10 or 20 employees going and finding that SOP and really understanding it separate from doing their job, it's like that's why SOPs feel like a waste of time, is because they're not in the mix.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, we're looking here at a comprehensive, personalized onboarding plan for a new person. Um, by the way, I just want to shout out your employee, Shannon Ward in Spain. She had the kind of inspiration to say, like, hey, let's have this be more than tasks. Because when I originally built this, I was focused on, let's make sure and get all of the onboarding steps for a department and a team and a country visible so they can work on those. But Shannon brought the perspective that, like, we need them to know who they're talking to in their first week, and let's give them pictures of those people and a description of why you would talk to that person. So that was a great addition by Shannon. That's Shannon right there. Anyway, like, good job. So we've got people to meet, and of course this is different in the North American template. And then this set of onboarding tasks here is basically a filtered duplicate of the onboarding master database, where onboarding steps are they get a scope, and the scope has to be one of these things. Is this item we're doing for every person, no matter what country they live in, or is this item specifically if you live in the United States or Spain or Canada, or is this item only done by managers, right? Because we're starting to establish a standard of what it means to be a manager, and so there's certain things that only managers need to do or learn during their onboarding. Um, or is this onboarding step specific to a particular department or a particular team inside of that department? So that is a mutually exclusive choice. You have to pick one of these, and that drives um, which set of onboarding tasks the employee sees. So if this is a person who is joining in Spain, I would add that. And I just got several new onboarding steps related to that. And then if they are in the um, engineering department, then I'm going to get some more steps pop in. And if they are on the GIS team, I'm going to get even more steps popping in. So um, that's how we create a customized experience for each person. And then, as you can see, we've got some groupings, like, are these onboarding steps, like, is it a tool that we're working with? Is it a cultural thing? And I think this is a great, like, this is like the number one onboarding step after our payroll and the basic requirements is let's learn about TechnoSilva's history, uh, mission, and future. And in a normal company onboarding situation, someone has to go write that. Like, that's like an essay that's going to get written, and then it's going to get stale, and it's not going to reflect a year later. Whatever someone wrote about that is not going to reflect the latest thing. What I love about what we're doing here is we're treating this onboarding card as a growing checklist of things to do in order for this person to accomplish this. And about a year ago, we had a global on-site meeting here in Austin, and there were some great speeches given by your co-founders,
Yeah.
Joaquin and Buck, and then your CEO Brian, all spoke about the heart behind the mission, how the company started. I mean, Buck was retiring, and so we ended up getting like a whole history of how Joaquin and Buck met and how the company started, in Spain and then migrated to the United States. And those were some amazing stories. And so a brand new employee a year from now, like, the chance of them finding that video is almost zero. But because we recognized how impactful those stories are, that content is referenced and linked out here in a Google Drive. But we are saying to every new employee, you need to watch this video. This is part of the definition of done of learning about TechnoSilva. And this actually raises a question, because a lot of people, when they see this, are like, wait a sec, so does that mean every single piece of content that I want someone to learn has to be in Notion? And the answer is no. We're using this as a curated index. And here we're pointing to Google Drive. Here we're pointing to a PowerPoint, which is probably also on Google Drive. So it's about curating the experience, not about having to migrate every Google Doc that you've ever written into Notion, right? Like, that's an impossible, it's not an impossible task, but it's not worth it's a task that's not worth the switching cost of moving every document.
And I think we talked about, like, should we make everything a wiki? At some point, like, get rid of documents altogether. And we backed off of that really quickly. So
Yeah, I think Google Docs and Google Drive, and like, they have their place. They're great. They're great for quick collaboration. I mean, I've gotten to the point where I use Notion personally so much that it feels fine to me to, like, spin up a private page and treat it like a Google Doc. But that's not behavior that we need to require of 180 employees in TechnoSilva that are just getting used to Notion, right? Like, that would be overkill. And so, but centralizing the onboarding in this way, and then linking out to the right content. I mean, like this page is in Notion, but then, as we said, these are not. So that's pretty cool. Okay. So we have onboarding tasks by priority: priority 1, priority 2, priority 3. Just do these things first, then do these things last. Here's what we were talking about earlier around, for any onboarding step, we can say, is there a person with whom you need to have a required meeting? And so if I'm this new person onboarding, I can see like, oh, I've got second and third priority conversations I need to have with Cara. I need to talk to Umberto. I've got a bunch I need to talk with Jesus about. So you get that full picture of, instead of Jesus feeling like, okay, I guess I got to tell you everything. How many hours is that going to take? And then the employee gets the satisfaction of like completing these tasks, and their manager can come in and say like, hey, we're coming to the end of the first week. How's it going? What do you have? You have any questions about any of this stuff? I mean, obviously the manager and the employee would be talking more than that anyway, but it gives a bird's eye view of how the onboarding is going.